Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. The GOP this week will formally renominate Donald Trump and Mike Pence for a second term in the White House. The Trump brand will be on full display each night, trying to drive home a counter message to the Democrats.
You want to crush our economy under the crazy socialist policies of sleepy Joe Biden and his boss, Kamala Harris.
Record highs for the stock market have given Trump something to crow about, but the rest of the economy is still reeling from the COVID-induced recession. And Trump will be facing newly pumped-up Democrats fresh off their own convention.
Donald Trump has already started his attacks, calling Kamala, quote, nasty.
Tonight, the politics, the policies, and the passions. The battle for the White House is on, and with it, a generational shift like no other as millions of first-time voters help choose the next president of the United States. Join us now as we present the Yahoo Finance 2020 Republican National Convention. Welcome to Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. I'm Andy Serwer. Joining me for the next hour is Yahoo Finance's Jess Smith, Kristen Myers, and Rick Newman. Tonight, we dive into the Republican Party and its nominee, President Donald Trump.
At the beginning of this year, President Donald Trump had plans to campaign on a strong U.S. economy.
Our people are prospering and spirits are soaring.
Until the coronavirus changed everything.
The markets recording their worst day since '87.
In early 2020, the unemployment rate was under 4% and the stock market was soaring. President Trump took all the credit, ignoring the economic growth of the Obama years.
America is now the hottest economy anywhere in the world.
In 2017, with a Republican House and Senate, President Trump signed his signature tax cuts into law.
And I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And corporations are literally going wild over this.
Trump used tariffs as a negotiating tactic despite opposition from business groups and many in his own party.
I love properly put on tariffs.
He made good on a 2016 campaign promise and renegotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement. The newly branded United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, earned support from labor groups and corporate America alike.
We just ended a nightmare known as NAFTA.
He signed the Phase 1 trade deal with China.
This is an unbelievable deal for the United States, and ultimately it's a great deal for both countries.
But only after tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars in goods and a trade war that U.S. businesses and farmers are still feeling. 7 months later, the United States' relationship with China is still as rocky as ever.
I don't want to deal with them now. With what they did to this country and to the world, I don't want to talk to China right now, okay?
Now voters will judge President Trump on his handling of COVID-19, a virus he downplayed for months.
A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat. As the heat comes in, we're in great shape. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
It will go away, just stay calm, it will go away.
More than 170,000 Americans are dead. The unemployment rate is at 10.2%, with millions out of work and small businesses going under. Science has been politicized, and the wealthiest nation on earth became one of the hardest hit.
President Trump's response to this crisis is a national and an international embarrassment.
Boosted by trillions of dollars in stimulus, U.S. stocks have bounced back from their March lows. President Trump insists the U.S. is handling the virus well and often uses the stock market as a measure of success.
In fact, NASDAQ is at an all-time high, so a lot of great things are happening.
President Trump is now making the case that he's the only candidate who can bring the economy back.
And if they win, we're going to have a crash. Your 401ks will go down like a rock.
But Democrats say the U.S. cannot afford 4 more years of Donald Trump. For Yahoo Finance, I'm Jessica Smith.
Thank you, Jessica. Joining us now is Chief Correspondent at Yahoo News, Michael Isikoff. And Michael, let me start with you. What do the Republicans need to do this week? What do they need to convey to the American people?
They need to scare the American public about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. as your opening piece points out, the strongest argument the president had, the booming economy, has basically been taken away from him because of the COVID pandemic. And so, absent the strongest positive message that Trump had, basically what he's left with is stirring up fears and anger over the prospect of a Biden-Harris administration.
A big theme we saw in the Democratic National Convention was reaching out to moderate Republicans. We saw some moderate Republicans speak, really reaching out to those voters. I know the president hasn't shown much interest in reaching out to people beyond his base at this point, but do you expect to see any of that at all this week at the convention?
He hasn't shown any interest in reaching out beyond his base. Look, if they had any Democrats who were willing to speak at the convention or endorse the president, I think we would have heard about that by now. And it is traditional, by the way, for each party to sort of find somebody from the other side and invite them to the convention to speak. You might remember, I believe it was Zell Miller in 2004 in New York, spoke at the Republican convention that renominated George W. Bush. He was a Democrat, former governor of Georgia. But because of the way the president has played this, it's not clear he has any Democrats who anybody would have heard of, who were office holders of any prominence, who are willing to do that. So you look at the speech lineup and you just don't see anybody who really fits that category. I should point out there's something really extraordinary about this Republican convention, other than the fact that, like the Democrats, it's virtual. And that is, did you catch the statement that they are foregoing a party platform? This is unprecedented. It's been tradition for more than 100 years, dating well back into the 19th century, for parties to use their conventions to put forth a platform that conveys their policy positions and the message they want to take to the American public. This year, the Republican RNC announced last night they're not going to do that. And instead, they simply put out a statement talking about how they stand wholeheartedly, the party stands wholeheartedly behind Donald Trump. It's actually a public affirmation of what critics have been saying for a long time now, which is that the Republican Party has simply become the party of Donald Trump, nothing more, nothing less.
Hey, Mike, on that point, there's a startling amount of overt opposition to Trump among some Republicans. We just heard today former Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona coming out saying he's going to support Biden, a bunch of others, Colin Powell, John Kasich last week. Do you think there is an additional covert level of opposition to Trump in the Republican Party, people who really are opposed to him, but they're just afraid to say so? And could that be a factor in this election?
Well, certainly that's been the case in Congress. I mean, we've all talked to members of Congress who will tell us, Republicans and Democrats privately, there's plenty of anxiety about the president's conduct, about his tweets, about his promotion of conspiracy theories and basically false information about just a range of matters. And that's produced a lot of heartburn, but until now, there have been very few, if any, Republicans who are office holders who are willing to speak out. We had on our Skullduggery podcast today, Rick Tyler, who was a former longtime aide strategist for Newt Gingrich and then Ted Cruz in the last election. And he's essentially become a never Trumper now. He says he intends to vote for Joe Biden. And I asked him about Ted Cruz, who he had worked for 4 years ago, and who was mercilessly attacked by Donald Trump. You remember Trump even accused his father of being involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And yet Cruz has been 100% down the line in support of Donald Trump. I asked Tyler how his former boss, Cruz, could do that, and he had one word explanation: cowardice. Cowardice on Cruz's part. He does not want to speak out against the president when he perceives the president has so much support among Republicans in Texas.
Mike, I'm wondering if you can comment on the Republicans' ground game, especially in contrast to the Democrats. As we're seeing these conventions, Democrats went completely virtual. The Republicans are doing a virtual plus in-person type of event. Do you think that the Republicans' willingness to actually get out there and campaign is actually going to sway voters in the run-up to the general as the pandemic continues to weigh on these elections?
Well, we'll see. I mean, COVID is a reality for millions and millions of Americans, especially in a lot of the battleground states that the president needs. So, we all saw what happened in Tulsa when Trump tried to have that initial rally, and what a debacle it was, how few people showed up. The president was furious, and there's clearly one reason why they didn't show up, and that is concern about getting sick. And so, we'll see, to the extent that they do try to have live events, how that's going to play given the reality of COVID.
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you, Michael Isikoff, so much for coming on.
Anytime.
Stay tuned for more.
Straight ahead on Yahoo Finance's RNC 2020 election special, Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson joins us to discuss the GOP's plan for 2020 and beyond. That's next.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. Joining me now is the governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson. Governor, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Hey, Andy, it's great to be with you today.
So what is the message that you're looking for from the convention this week when it comes to the economy?
Well, when it comes to the convention, I expect, first of all, that the president, but also his speakers, will focus on what happened pre-COVID in our country and how the economy was marching on in a very successful fashion under President Trump's leadership. And then he's got to pivot to the current challenges and the future. And everybody is wanting to see what will be another 4 years like under President Trump. I think he has a message to deliver that it's going to be continued reduction of regulations that hurt the growth of business. It's going to be a tax policy that is pro-growth. And, you know, as much as we want to cut taxes, we recognize that because of COVID, we're continuing to build up a pretty big national debt. So I think they've got to have a pro-growth policy and define what that is in terms of the economy. And then it's also about the pocketbook. It's about how we're going to have the next stimulus package, which I believe our country still needs, and to address the president's plan for the current challenges that we face. But we're all looking to see a positive message, a message of hope and optimism about where we're going to be going in the future. People are looking for that kind of message.
You mentioned COVID-19, Governor, a number of times, and I'm curious as to how the president is going to convey a positive message and a message of success when it comes to the virus and the economy when people are still dealing with the coronavirus.
Well, what he should do and what he will do might be two different things. But when it comes to the coronavirus, what any leader has learned very quickly is you better be humble about it. Because you can't gloat. You don't know what's around the corner, and you know, this is not the time for the biggest and greatest. This is the time for a serious discussion of this. Sure, we all make mistakes as we lead through this. We lean upon the best advice we can, but I don't think people need to have boosterism when it comes to the coronavirus. I think we need to have strong leadership, which the president has provided. And I think it's fine to remind him of what he's done in first stopping the flights to and from China, to stop that cycle very quickly. The fact that they have supported the states and recognized the role of the states and support us every step of the way. But a humble approach is the best one to take as he looks at how we're going to come out of this, hopefully with a vaccine, and that's the message I think we need to hear.
Well, let's drill down on that state point that you just made, Governor, because in 2016 you talked about needing a president who values the role of the states in your speech there. Has President Trump, in fact, lived up to that? Because at various points he's talked about having total authority over states, and states are still waiting for some stimulus as well.
Well, absolutely. He's recognized the role of the states. You know, for example, Joe Biden wants to have a national mandate, national policies. And President Trump has taken it a different way and recognized the role the states have to play, and that what might be good for New York is not necessarily good for North Dakota. I mean, it makes a big difference whether you have density of population or otherwise. And so that has been important to recognize the leadership role of the governors, and he has supported that. And part of it, I think, because the vice president's a former governor, he understands that unique role and responsibility, and then they supported us in carrying it out.
You wrote an op-ed piece about wearing masks in your state, and you have a new mandate to do that. Do you think the president has been setting a good example when it comes to mask wearing, Governor?
Well, it took him a while to get there, but yes, whenever he put on that mask, he wore that mask, and then he said publicly, this is important, we need to do this. That's unified our national and state leadership and our healthcare professionals, our doctors, saying this is one thing that we can do. And you think about, it's a pretty good conservative Republican principle that is the ultimate individual responsibility. I am going to do this. I'm going to wear a mask. It's my responsibility to do it because that's one thing I can do to slow the spread of the virus. And he has set that example that's unified us, and it is critically important. All our leadership needs to do this because that's really the best tool that we have as we look at school, as we look at business opportunities in the future.
Governor, and finally, I want to ask you about how things are going in Arkansas. You mentioned you're opening school today, so congratulations on that. You never had a stay-at-home order and limited business closings, low cases early, then the spike in the summer.
than your mask mandate. And now you've, yesterday I'm seeing here 375 new COVID cases. How would you characterize the situation in your state right now, sir?
Well, right now we're in an improving position. We can't let up because our cases are on a downward trend, and that's very positive. But we're starting school, we're starting activities again, and so that's why we're having to really focus on that social distancing and the individual responsibility. If we don't, our cases are going to go back up. In terms of our business climate, we've taken the approach that let's not shut down businesses. Let's give them the tools to stay open, and let's tell each individual out there of their responsibility. And our Kansans have embraced that, and it's exciting to me as governor. While I'm busy with COVID and our emergency response, today I had a call with a CEO recruiting them to come to Arkansas. We've got businesses and industry that's in the pipeline for announcements. Arkansas is a great place to do business, and we have the motto that in Arkansas, every business is essential. And that's what we want people to understand.
All right, you got that pitch in at the end there. Thank you very much for your time. Asa Hutchinson, Governor of Arkansas. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Straight ahead on Yahoo Finance's RNC 2020 election special, our panel breaks down the top issues for Republicans as we head toward November. That's next.
I am going to bring back our jobs to Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York and Michigan. I pledge to never sign any trade agreement that hurts our workers or that diminishes our freedom and our independence. We will never, ever sign bad trade deals using the greatest business people in the world, which our country has. I am going to turn our bad trade agreements into great trade agreements.
That was President Trump accepting the nomination for president by the Republican Party back in July of 2016. So much has changed, though, between then and now. And I want to turn to our panel and get into that a little bit. Rick Newman, let me start with you. Obviously, COVID is different. But what else is different between that election and this election right now?
People are more anxious about everything, basically. We did a poll with Harris. We actually unveiled it a week ago when we were doing our special for the Democratic convention. I'll just give you some of the results about the level of concerns people have going into the election this year. So just looking at this on my computer, 88% say they're very concerned about public safety, healthcare 87%, economy 87%, public health 86%, that's the coronavirus, education 85%, and national debt 82%. In 2016, there was no single issue on which more than 80% of voters said they were concerned. So I don't think any of that is surprising. I mean, look what's happening. People are very concerned about what's happening with the coronavirus. And also, people are losing their health care as they become unemployed. So people are just there. We have more problems right now, and that is on voters' minds without a doubt.
Jess, let me ask you, there are all kinds of other differences as well, though, right?
Yeah, one difference that I think really sticks out to me is the fact that there is no doubt over the kind of president that Donald Trump will be. And you could make the argument that it was pretty clear who President Trump was back when he was a candidate. But I remember reporting in the Midwest in 2016 and talking to Republican voters who would say over and over again that Donald Trump will surround himself with the smartest people. He knows that he doesn't have experience in government, so he will surround himself with the best. He will listen to the advice of others. He will stop tweeting like he does. The Oval Office will change him. And I think that's very difficult to make that argument this time around.
Yeah, that's right. Kristen, so what about the electorate? How is that shaping into this election, maybe in a different way than previously?
Yeah, Andy. So we talk a lot about essentially who these voters are and the issues that are incredibly important to them. And lately, we've been talking a lot about the minority vote. So just to throw some statistics out there that is going to really come into play for the 2020 election, this is according to Pew Research. About a third of the eligible voters in this upcoming election are not going to be white. So that is a huge shift that we're seeing there just from a couple of years ago in the 2016 general election. And while the always be a reliable indicator on what we're going to be expecting in the following general, some interesting statistics there when it comes to at least turnout. This one here is from Brookings. So Republican turnout in the 2018 election increased 27% from the previous midterm elections back in 2014. So that's great for Republicans. But then when you look over at the Democrats, their turnout actually increased by a whopping 70%, Andy. So we're seeing, at least when it comes to voter turnout, that Democrats are getting to the polls more and more. And as we already know, historically, Republicans have been incredibly enthusiastic when it comes to the elections. They are incredibly enthusiastic about the 2020 election. But we're going to have to see if having younger, more progressive, and also more non-white voters is at all going to change the results that we're going to see at the general in November.
If I could just add a couple points to what Kristen's talking about. Another important change is this core group of Trump voters in 2016. You might call them nativists, the people to whom Make America Great Again really appealed. Those are, I mean, there is a significant portion of the U.S. electorate that is very nervous about legal immigration and obviously illegal immigration. You could say they are anti-immigration, and that cohort is getting a little bit smaller. They tend to be older white people, working class white people in the Midwest. Time is simply claiming some of them, and they are just becoming a smaller portion of the overall electorate. One other thing I think is really important is what's been happening with civil rights protests, George Floyd protests. If the Black voter turnout in 2016 had been at the same levels as in 2012, Hillary Clinton probably would have won. So Black voter turnout is a huge issue this time around. And because of what's been happening with the protests, and having a Black woman on the Democratic ticket, that would probably seem to be a plus on the Democrat side this time around.
Well, Jessica, let me turn to you because that's kind of a bone of contention here. Can either candidate swing voters one way or the other? In other words, are there any undecided voters, or is the whole thing about turnout both on the Democrat side and the Republicans?
I mean, it is always about turnout, but I do think there are some undecided voters out there. We talked to one last week during our special at the DNC when I talked to a Wisconsin farmer who said he still has not made up his mind because he hasn't heard enough from Vice President Biden when it comes to agricultural policies and whatnot. So I think that is something that we're going to hear from others, especially in those swing states, people who are just still trying to make up their minds. But I don't think the conventions are going to really change many people's minds. I think once we start getting into the debates, that's when people will start really making their decisions. Most of these conventions are a show for the party. So I don't think we'll see a lot of people flip or make their mind up one way or another this week.
All right, lots more to talk about. Stay tuned for more after this.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's RNC 2020 election special, why former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says Republicans need to do better to engage Black American voters. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Yahoo Finance 2020 Republican National Convention special. I'm joined now by Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary under President Trump. So, Sean, I want to start right now with the recent polls that we have out lately. Right now, Trump is trailing Joe Biden by roughly 8 points. How tight of a race do you think it's going to be in November? And is there any concern from you or from Republicans that Trump actually might lose the election?
So it's good to be with you. Look, am I worried? No. It's going to be a close election. We've had close elections since 2000, Bush v. Gore, for those older viewers might remember. We are a divided country. We are a close nation. And so it's going to be across 15 states. I will remind people a couple things. National polling should not be looked at, and that's whether we're up or down. But the reality is this isn't a national election. It's a battleground state election. Anywhere between, 10 and 15 states are going to decide this election.
So to that point about this being an election about the battleground states, because of the coronavirus, essentially the Biden campaign has had to do all of their campaign events virtually. And in some instances have left these battleground states behind. Are you seeing it the same way that right now the Democrats are not doing enough to win over voters in those battleground states?
Kristen, right now, within these battleground states, the campaigns have enormous amounts of data on the voters. I think it's not I don't think anyone would object to saying the Republicans' data machine is much better than the Democrats. Hillary was very clear on that after the last cycle. The Democrats did not have what she believed was an adequate data system. Right now, we've gotten to a point since Barack Obama ran where the campaigns are building up voter files on each individual voter, and it's become a much more personal relationship. It's about turning out those folks. The high propensity folks, meaning the people who vote like it's a religion, they go out every election day, they don't have to be told, and then really getting those low propensity voters who may not be a registered Republican or a registered Democrat, but they may be an independent that tends to vote Republican or Democrat, once every 4 or 8 years. Getting those people out is going to be crucial. So the question is, who's got the better ground game? And right now, to your point, the Biden campaign has made a decision to go entirely virtual. If they win, okay, I think that this is going to be something that they look back on November 4th. When President Trump gets reelected and say this was a big mistake, because not going door to door, the studies have all shown that engaging on a personal level with voters is the most effective thing that you could possibly do.
So I'm going to just ask you straight up, how do you think the president has been handling the pandemic? The Biden campaign, to be expected, has lampooned the president for his response, but he's also gotten a lot of criticism from other government officials, from public health officials on his response time to the pandemic, undermining, even members of the government, public health officials like Dr. Fauci in his response. Do you think that the president has made missteps?
I think, look, this is a novel virus, right? And if we look back and you look at how the media handled this, how everyone read it back in January, you had the Washington Post, Vox, the New York Times, CNN, everyone saying this isn't going to be that big of a deal. People are panicking. They're hyping this up. No one knew what was coming. That being said, I think the initial response from the government was strong. There was a period of time, a couple weeks, where I think the White House kind of could have done a better job messaging what we should have been doing and how we should be focused. But the last few weeks, I think the president has been pitch perfect when it comes to the response and how he's discussing the need to address the virus, both personally in terms of mask wearing, social distancing, et cetera, and where we are as a government trying to pursue both therapeutics and a vaccine.
So I want to now ask about the black vote. Majority of black voters, obviously, right now they do back Joe Biden. And what we've gotten recently from the Trump campaign, a lot of critics are saying, frankly, just a lot of racist messaging, particularly on the matter of low-income housing and the suburbs and the suburban housewife right now. So how important is the black vote to the Republican Party? And how much work do you think that Republicans and even the president needs to do in order to essentially entice black voters over not just to the party, but to the president himself?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think, look, the Republican Party in general has done horrible in the last couple decades with the black vote, and they need to do better. One of the big things that I did during my tenure at the White House, that was led by then Chairman Reince Priebus, was to really make sure that we go out and engage in the black communities. I mean, it's a fact that Republicans, especially when it came to House districts, they don't have a ton of urban areas. So you would ignore large, you wouldn't go into black neighborhoods or black churches or black chambers of commerce because they weren't part of the coalition you needed to get to 50+1. That's a mistake in the party, both in terms of the short term and definitely in the long term. And I think too often, and I had a guest on my show recently where we talked about this, Republicans say, well, here's all the reasons why they should be with us, right, in terms of whether it's black voters or Latino voters. But the reality is the party's done a really bad job of engaging with them. And that's where I think that we can't just say, well, this is what we stand for. What I think is going to be really interesting this cycle is that the president, more so than any Republican in recent history, has really made an effort with his policies to really talk about what he's doing for the black community, whether it's opportunity zones, increases to the historically black community, colleges and universities, empowerment zones, criminal justice reform. All of these things are good for the black community, and they're frankly policies that haven't been done by Republican or Democrat in the past couple of administrations. He's got a strong policy case to go out there, and I think you're starting to see a lot more of the messaging focus on that.
All right. Thanks so much, Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Straight ahead on Yahoo Finance's RNC 2020 election special, we speak with former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld about the current state of the Republican Party. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back, everyone. Joining us now is William Weld. He's the former governor of Massachusetts, and he ran against President Trump in the Republican primaries earlier this year. Governor Weld, good to see you again.
Rick, it's great being back with you. I love talking with you in New York during that first presidential campaign.
That was fun. What are you expecting out of the convention this week?
You know, I regard it as kind of a surreal experience with the president making statements, and I think you know, it's a collection generally of dog whistles and trick moves. I don't think it's really very straightforward when this president speaks. You know, he may have an agenda, but it's kind of a hidden agenda. I'm reminded of the last cycle when they would send out images of George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the Nazi Party, just briefly on the screen, and then say, "What? Where did that come from? We don't know anything about that." But their intended audience received it. And I thought most of the last campaign was of that nature. So I don't expect a straightforward performance. I think you're going to have to watch the shell game.
What is going on inside the Republican Party at the moment? There is a surprising amount of opposition to Trump's candidacy from people inside the party. What portion of the Republican Party do you think supports and opposes Trump at this point?
Well, I think he's got a pretty good hold on a considerable majority of the party. You know, there are people like myself and Christy Whitman from New Jersey and Colin Powell, you know, people I've worked with a lot in the past. We're not for Trump at all. And I think the most interesting question is what's going to happen in January, February, because right now there's this kind of unreal equation where 99 members of the United States Senate cast a vote saying that the president had not committed an offense warranting his removal. I worked on doing a law for both the Nixon impeachment and the Clinton impeachment. And what he did with Ukraine and trying to feather his own political nest by getting a foreign leader to interfere in our election, that's the most classic removable offense I've ever seen. And this is an area where I do know the law. So something's wrong with this picture for all the Republicans except for one, I guess that's 52, to cast that vote. Whether their you know, failure of judgment would extend to every other vote, no, I don't think so. But it's an unhealthy situation there, and something's going to have to give.
So let's say Trump loses, Biden is ahead in the polls at this point. What happens to the Republican Party in that case? Do we suddenly see people, you know, sitting members of Congress coming out and saying, "I was against Trump all along," and the party kind of goes back to what it was, or is the Republican Party irredeemably changed forever?
Well, I think it's changed forever if they do stick with Trump. Something's got to break. And I think in January and February, whether Trump wins or loses, you're going to see an effort by moderate Republicans joined by moderate Democrats, some practical libertarians, many environmentalists, the old Green Party, come together to form a second party. It might start out being a third party, but it'll be a new party. And I don't think it'll be called the Republican Party. I think that brand will be tarnished. It might be called the Unity Party, unity being something that's lacking. And, you know, my hope is that that third party, if it started out in third place, could overtake the second party. That happened in Britain, where the Labour Party started out with almost nothing and quite rapidly overtook the Liberal Party, which had been the #2 party. And that can happen in just a few years. It happened in the 1850s. I know that's a long time ago, but when the Whig Party broke in half and the northern anti-slavery half joined with John C. Fremont's Free Soil Party, they didn't win in 1856, but the next time around, they won the whole thing. They elected Abraham Lincoln president of the United States. So, and I've had meetings with many, many people who are, you know, the coalition of the concerned, people who don't always come out and talk, but they're terribly troubled by what Mr. Trump has done. My longtime media guy and close political friend, Stuart Stevens, has written a book that's on the bestseller list now called "It Was All a Lie," how the Republican Party became Donald Trump. I think that kind of has happened. So I think the consequences are going to be, it's going to be a consequential election, put it that way.
You're obviously not a Trump fan. Are you planning to endorse Joe Biden?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've said many times on television and otherwise, and people say, what are we supposed to do now? I say endorse Joe Biden. I didn't say that while I was still in the race, but I got out in March. And so now I'm committed to that. And I think in the month of September, you probably will see a whole bunch of Republicans and independents roll out for Biden.
What's your best guess about who's going to win and why?
I think Biden will win because I don't think the American people can swallow the amount of hyperbole and razzmatazz that they would have to essentially trust the Trump administration to deliver the goods. I mean, I've said in the last cycle when I was running for vice president that don't think the president has the background to be president and do the job that has to be done. You know, you look at the coronavirus. He doesn't want science involved. You look at all the stuff in the Justice Department and all the indictments of his associates. He doesn't want law involved. He spent his entire life trying to avoid and duck law and defeat law, and he doesn't like any rules being applied to himself. I think that's pretty scary in a man who makes no secret of the fact that he wants to take over entirely. He likes acting cabinet secretaries because they don't have any power. You know, a lot of what he does is just textbook Benito Mussolini on the way up, or another European leader of the 30s I could name, but won't.
Governor Bill Weld, thanks for joining us. See you again, I hope.
Thanks, Rick.
To you.
Okay, Rick. Hey, throughout the presidency of Donald Trump, you've been grading the Trump economy by comparing him to past administrations. Can you tell us about the latest Trumponomics report card?
I would love to. I'm so glad you asked. We've been doing this project since Trump took office, just measuring how his how 6 economic factors that everybody can understand, how he's doing on those compared to other prior presidents at the same point in their first term in office, and then we convert that into a letter grade. So Trump's grade at the moment is a C, which might sound surprisingly high to some people, given that we've got the highest unemployment rate in decades and all the other problems we know about. But I'll quickly go through the 6 indicators and explain why it's a C. So on 3 of the indicators, Trump is dead last in comparing him with the other presidents. That's total employment, exports, and GDP. On 2 other indicators, manufacturing jobs and the stock market, Trump is actually doing middling. He's sort of in the middle of the pack. And then on 1 indicator, which is average hourly earnings, he's actually at the top. He gets the top rating compared with 6 other presidents for a total of 7 for hourly earnings. Some of this, I think, is sort of statistical quirks. I mean, one thing we've seen recently with all the layoffs is that average earnings have actually gone up because what a lot of companies have done is lay off lower paid workers, which has raised the average pay of those who are left. And of course, the stock market now is doing pretty surprisingly well, probably because of the Federal Reserve. But nonetheless, you know, presidents always either get credit or blame for what happens in the economy while they're there, whether they deserve it or not. And Trump is getting a solid C right now.
So, Rick, I know you've been doing this scoring system for a very long time right now. I'm wondering if you can let the audience know, how was Trump doing pre-pandemic and now that we're fully in the thick of it?
Sure. The highest grade he got in our index was an A-, and that was fairly early in his presidency. And then through, you know, the end of 2019 and into 2020, he was either at a B+ or a B. And, you know, this gives you some perspective. So when Trump, you know, he will say this week, and he has said many times, we had before the virus, or sorry, the plague, as he calls it, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world. We actually didn't. And I can go through the data and say, you know, here's how employment compares with prior presidents, the stock market, and so forth. So that B grade that he had prior to the pandemic, that feels about right. I mean, the highest quarterly GDP number Trump got, I think, was 3%. That's about what Obama got. So that's a B economy.
Hey, Rick, a quick last question on Trumponomics. Is it possible for his report card to change significantly between now and November 3rd?
Yeah, it is. One area he's held up pretty well has been manufacturing employment, surprisingly, and that's mainly because there were just so many wipeouts for prior presidents. So that if that goes back up, that would help him out and raise his grade a little bit. On the other hand, is the stock market going to continue to defy reality? If it does not, that would drop and be a negative for him. My guess is he'll probably have about a C grade as we get to Election Day in November.
All right, Rick Newman, thanks very much. Stay tuned for more coming up after this.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's RNC 2020 election special, we'll speak with RNC Deputy Communications Director Cassie Smedley about what we can expect at this year's convention. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. Joining us now is AGF Investments Chief U.S. Strategist Greg Valliere. Greg, nice to see you.
You.
So the soaring stock market's got people wondering, Greg, is it because people think Donald Trump has the situation under control and we're going to be heading back a V-shaped recovery, or is it the case that people think Biden's going to win and provide more stimulus, or is it maybe both?
Or if I could give you a third, I think there's a widespread feeling in the markets that should the markets falter, you'll have Jerome Powell save them. I think Jerome Powell is determined to keep the economy afloat and the markets afloat. I think that's a huge factor.
Hey, Greg, I read your daily newsletter, and you've been on our Electionomics podcast, and you've talked about this. You frequently remind people, don't count Donald Trump out, even though he's behind by about 8 points to Joe Biden nationally at this point. So how does Trump win this thing? What would it take? Would it take Joe Biden self-destructing, some kind of remarkable recovery in the economy? What do you think could do it?
Well, first of all, it's worth noting that 4 years ago, Trump was behind by 6 or 7 points. I think he's right now behind by maybe 7.5 points, but it's still doable, especially if you look at the battleground states, Pennsylvania, for example, where the numbers have tightened. So how could he win? I think, yeah, first of all, Biden is good for a gaffe every couple of weeks. I think that's why his team has kept him quiet. I think that would be a factor. I think that Trump, for all of his many flaws, is a really, really aggressive campaigner. In the last couple of weeks against Hillary Clinton, Trump did 4 or 5 big events a day. He showed tremendous energy, and he may again. He may catch the wave. He may catch the momentum, but we can't delude ourselves. Trump is clearly the underdog.
So, Greg, it's Kristen here. I'm wondering, to that point, specifically on the voters themselves. One, can Biden win back states like Ohio, where working class voters essentially have left the Democratic Party, even though the labor movement does back Democrats? They've gone over to President Trump. And do you think that Donald Trump can do anything essentially to win back that suburban, college educated, white female voter, because they are overwhelmingly starting to say that they are also backing Democrats?
You're absolutely right. I think the key is college-educated women. Trump's numbers with college-educated women are just terrible. Could he win Ohio? Sure. I think he probably will win Ohio. I happen to be in a minority. I think the most important state is Florida, not Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or Arizona. If Trump loses Florida, we can all go to bed by midnight. I think that without Florida, Trump cannot win re-election. And the polls show him ahead by 5 or 6 points. It's interesting that in the 2 states that have the highest number of retirees, Florida and Arizona, Trump is not doing well. And I think that may be indicative of his performance on the virus. I think a lot of senior citizens feel he's been too dismissive of the virus.
President Trump has really struggled to nail down his pitch to voters for a second term. I know his campaign released a big, broad list of policy ideas that he'd like to pursue, but not a lot of details. Do you expect that we'll hear more of these details in the coming weeks and really in the convention over the next few days?
No, I don't think they'll get too explicit on the issues. I think they're pretty hazy on the issues. I do think, though, they have 2 agenda issues they're going to bash Joe Biden over. Number one is Biden's reliance on an enormous amount of tax increases, whether it's individual, corporate, capital gains, estate tax, on and on and on. There's going to be a huge amount of tax hikes proposed by Biden, and that could come back to haunt him. And the other thing is urban violence, which the Democrats did not talk about last week. And whether it's Portland or shootings in Chicago, it's a serious issue. And I think that this will be one where the Republicans will seek a big advantage.
Greg, on those points, the market has not wavered at all. I mean, stocks have only gone up this summer as Biden has taken a pretty solid lead in this election. I mean, there are some things about Biden that might be good for business, possibly a big infrastructure program and then more stable relations with China and so forth. Can we conclude at this point that the investors and the stock market is fine with the prospect of a Biden presidency?
I think the markets have made their peace with this. What they have not made their peace with is the Senate going to the Democrats. If the Democrats controlled all 3, presidency, White House, and Senate and House, that's maybe not a good story for the markets. The markets tend to like divided government, and I think that if the Senate falls, it's a close call, but the Senate could fall. If the Democrats control everything, I think that is not in the markets.
Greg Berlier, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tune for more coming up.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's RNC 2020 election special, we'll speak with RNC Deputy Communications Director Cassie Smedley about what we can expect at this year's convention. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. Joining us now is RNC Deputy Communications Director Cassie Smedley. Cassie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Donald Trump appears to be 8 percentage points or so behind in the polls. And my question to you is, does that mean the president needs to change his message or just work harder at getting his message across?
Yeah, I think we see that this poll trend is about where things were in 2016. This is now just turning the corner into the time when people and voters are really starting to tune in and pay attention. Certainly, they have had every right to have a few other things on their mind this year. So we're really getting into that home stretch where people are really starting to focus on the decision they're going to make when they go into the polls. But this also presents an opportunity for the president to really crystallize on the message that he has been sending about the best is yet to come, but so much good that we've already done together. So let's keep this going. And that's what you're going to hear a lot about this week. Not only hearing from people you know, but also learning a lot of new names and new stories from people sharing their experience and how the policies of this administration have positively impacted them and their families. And then the president's also going to build on that by laying out the vision for the next 4 years.
Cassie, I'm wondering if there's a concern, at least on the part of the Republican Party, over what might be a growing disenchantment with the president right now. Disapproval ratings had been increasing throughout the pandemic, and we are seeing Democratic voters that say that they're going to be voting for Biden increasingly say they are doing so strictly in opposition of the president. Does that at all worry you guys in the run-up to the general? And what are you guys going to be doing to entice some of those voters back to the polls?
Yeah, so in terms of support within our party, the president has always enjoyed well into the 90s, sometimes mid-90s or above. And then just last week, there was a Rasmussen poll that had him at 51% approval overall, so a trend very much in the right direction. And then I would also note that we have welcomed in hundreds of thousands of people to our party and to our movement as volunteers, donors, large and small, over the past just couple of years, who say that they are either registered Democrats or independents or have never voted before. When we were doing rallies routinely prior to the pandemic, it was not uncommon that 1/3 of RSVPs were people who identified as Democrats or unaffiliated, and many of them were first-time voters. And that's a trend that we saw really start to take hold in 2016 as President Trump was making that case to be the champion for the forgotten men and women of America. I think that still holds, that still resonates, and we've certainly seen that reflected in the hardworking men and women who have joined our movement to knock on a door or make a phone call or just gather some friends together to watch one of the nights of the convention.
Hey, Cassie, Rick Newman here. Many analysts on all sides say President Trump needs to expand his appeal beyond his base, the well-known base, in order to win in November. How can we expect to hear him appeal to those voters this week?
Yeah, and I would just make one note that we very much have expanded the base from 2016. The group of voters that we're looking at expecting to come out to vote for the president is not the same group that we saw in 2016. It's much larger than that. And we know that, again, because they are people who have volunteered and people who have donated, which, of course, is a very strong indicator of where they are. But in terms of issues that can reach even more voters or either further cement the supporters that he already has, for sure, the economy. We know perennially the economy is one of the top issues that forces people, that moves people to go out and vote. But right there with it is national security. And right now, that's a domestic issue for us. Law and order. People who see lawlessness in the streets of their towns that they once thought would always be safe, that they once thought would always be a place for their families to be able to go downtown to dine or to shop. And they're no-go zones right now because of the lawlessness, many of them in Democrat-run cities. That's a big theme that's resonating with so many of our voters. And President Trump is absolutely on the right side as saying we're going to stand with our police and public safety officials. We're also going to stand with those in the communities to make sure that they've got a safe place to raise their children and just simply go out to eat.
Cassie, I'm curious what you say about the criticism that it's unclear at this point exactly what policies the Republican Party stands for. Republicans opted not to vote on a new party platform for 2020, and we've heard from some critics that shows that Republicans are the party of President Trump right now, not necessarily conservative values. What do you say to that criticism that we're hearing?
Yeah, I think in terms of the platform, that was a decision based solely on COVID, that they wanted to make sure that we had the requisite number of people there in person, and that wasn't done by just a small number or small percentage of people making the argument for everyone. But there's real clarity on where this party is, where the president has been, certainly with the economy and how he has been a man of his word on long-held conservative beliefs about fairer trade deals, about bringing jobs back to the United States. And then you want to talk about conservative values. Donald Trump has been the most pro-life president, certainly in my lifetime and arguably in modern history, with actually attending the March for Life, actually standing up for the unborn. And then you also go and you look at how he has been a champion for the forgotten men and women of America. You know, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act not only allowed you to keep more of your hard-earned money, but it created these opportunity zones, something I think we're going to hear about from Senator Tim Scott tonight, where these areas that were crossed off the list, counted out, people said, what'll be will be, they're never could be heard from again. And yet they're coming back. And the people believe that they have a leader in the White House or in Congress or in the Senate, of course, in the case of Senator Tim Scott, who says, I believe in you. I believe that if we give you the tools, whether that's deregulation or letting you keep more of your hard-earned dollars, you will forge your American dream. And that's going to be a good news story for all of us. And again, that's a lot of what we're going to hear about this week. This optimistic tone of together we made this happen. We made the strongest economy since World War II. We're bouncing back faster than anyone expected. And that is because President Trump laid the foundation to empower American workers to chart their path and create their American dream.
So to that point, Cassie, we actually heard a little bit earlier in the show, Sean Spicer actually saying that the Republican Party has done a horrible job on the black vote and has not done enough to engage black voters. How much of that is weighing in on your calculations going forward, either throughout this week, but also in the run up to the general, to entice those black voters who are overwhelmingly right now backing Biden over Trump?
Yeah, I didn't hear his comments. I imagine he was pointing towards the historical numbers in terms of how we do with the black community. But I would just look at, for example, yes, I mentioned the opportunity zones. We've seen people also like Alice Johnson, who I think we'll also hear from tonight, who was a woman that President Trump very famously pardoned, and how she has been a great example for second chances, what happens when you give second chances to great Americans. And then to put on top of that, just look at the slate of candidates that we've been able to recruit this year. We're very proud that we've expanded our numbers. We have a record number of women who are running as GOP candidates. We've got a very large number of black candidates, far larger than we've seen, I would say, in at least the last decade. And we're going to hear from a lot of them tonight, including on our pre-prime time stream that we're doing through the GOP channels as well, in addition to the campaign's work. So people are going to see from this Republican Party and this Republican convention a lot of people that look like the people that they live next door to. They're going to hear a lot of stories that resonate with the lives they're leading. It'll be a very different picture from, I think, what we heard last week during the DNC, where they were downtrodden, practically apologetic for our country. And so many people said that just doesn't jive with the world that I live in, the country that I live in, and the America that I'm very proud to be a citizen of.
All right, Cassie Smedley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I want to turn to a panel now and get some final thoughts. Jessica Smith, I want to start with you. So is Donald Trump sort of like the old New England Patriots? Don't worry, they're behind, but you know they're going to win in the long run anyway. Oh, Jess. Well, why don't I throw that question to Kristen? How about you? Is Donald Trump like the New England Patriots? He's behind, but he's just going to come back and win.
I think we lost Jess there. Yeah. Well, I'm not a Pats fan, Andy. But look, this is going to be an incredibly close race. I don't think anyone is actually saying, no matter what, Trump is going to come out ahead, just because he won the last election and because he has such enthusiastic supporters behind him. There's a lot of factors that are coming in at play here. We saw over the midterm elections, turnout was increasingly high. I think it'll even exceed that in this general election. And Democrats have been able to pick up steam. Unfortunately for the Democrats, they've gone completely virtual. They have not been going door to door, and they've been missing out on that working class vote, which right now says, hey, we need to stick with President Trump for job security. So it's going to be interesting in the general election to see what issues are going to be top of mind for some of those voters that are going to be getting out to the polls.
Andy, I'll give you
Rick,
my my two top takeaways from the last hour. First of all, Greg Valliere said, watch Florida. If Trump can't win Florida, he cannot win the election. What he means by that is if Biden can get the margin of victory he needs in Florida, he's almost certainly going to get it in the other swing states that matter: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. So watch Florida. Number two, we heard the spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. She said something very interesting to me, which is, for us, national security is a domestic issue. And I think that is one wild card for the next 10 weeks or so, is how much fear can Trump drum up about the protests that are happening in these cities? And these protests are a mess in a few cities. Portland, there is an element of lawlessness to it, and those cities are run by Democrats. So can Trump effectively connect that with Biden or not? I don't know, but I think he's going to try hard, and that could be decisive in November.
All right. And that concludes Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. I want to thank our panelists, Jessica Smith, Kristen Myers, and Rick Newman. And thank you all very much for watching.